the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Nissen. Today I am lucky enough to have with me Jeremy Harper. Jeremy, why don't you give me a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure, I'm Jeremy Harper, and I write character-focused dark fantasy. I was heavily influenced by various different series, but I always sort of wished for some of my favorite series would do something different or end differently. The only way I could really control this is if I was the one who was creating the story. I wanted to continue to explore darker emotions without restraint, and I personally have always found more motivation and life lessons out of stories and fantasy, and I just wanted to be able to contribute to that.
When you say you were influenced by dark fantasy, were these novels or cartoons or?
For the most part...
You call them comics, not cartoons.
Yeah, for the most part, I read a lot of comics like manga, and I watch a lot of like anime. I have read quite a few. Like I grew up on Fear Street novels by R.L. Stine, so that's a little bit of kind of like the same realm, but a little more watered down for kids, you know.
So, are you working on novels versus comics?
Yes, I actually am working on novels, and not because I can't really draw. So,
as opposed to just writing the comic script.
Yeah, I don't really know any collaborators either. I just feel like it's easier for me to control it if I'm the one who's writing. And I've always kind of had, I've been kind of good at writing. Like in school, I was kind of praised for it. So I feel like it's enough.
Do you include any parts of yourself in these novels?
I think I put a lot of myself into these novels. Some characters a little more, some characters a little less. But everything I create, I'm personally invested in. Like a lot of people, I've suffered with depression and loss. My main goal was just to convey into words and show that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, that's always a great message to get. I love when we open up a book, we fall in love with the characters, and there is some sort of message of hope or outward looking, meaning to the future, that things have the potential to transport us somewhere else if we just put our mind to it. What do you like to do when you are not writing?
Well, like I mentioned, I read a lot of manga, I watch a lot of anime, I play a lot of video games. I'm just really a lot of nerdy stuff. I'll pick a few different anime for every 3-month season, and I'll literally watch 5 to 6 shows at a time. I just try to immerse myself in as much fantasy as possible for inspiration and motivation.
So do you find that the manga stories are different than what you're writing?
I guess it depends on the story. Obviously, I have I've read a lot of manga, so there are probably instances in which what I've read is bleeding over a little bit into what I'm writing. And it's at the end of the day, the stories, they all have their message and their goals. So it's still kind of the same concept. It's just a matter of what words you write around that.
Compared to the manga where there is an image that the audience sees, how do you put descriptions into your novels?
Pretty good question. I actually had someone too, when they were beta reading, ask me about that. For the most part, I don't know.
What's the scenery? What's the setting?
I just try and create. I try and lay a foundation, because for the most part, I'm so focused on characters and more about the descriptions of their feelings, what they're thinking, what they're doing, and that's just kind of almost like you're keeping a journal.
So it is really character based.
Yes.
Do they have? Do we see where they're living? Do we see their homes or what their surroundings look like?
Okay, so a more what the direct setting. Yeah, it's pretty much focused in the real world, and then I transition it to a fantasy world. So a lot of the description, initially, will be kind of an urban society. You'll see a dark street, street lights overhead, kind of more basic, whatever you would see if you were to go outside your door and go into the city. And then I transition into a more fantastical world, which is based more kind of on what you would see if you're playing a game, or if you're reading something more fantastical, like Harry Potter or Aragon. I don't know if you ever heard of that one.
I have read Aragon, as a matter of fact. I had boys growing up, and so I loved the opportunity to read with them, even when they were old enough for themselves to read, but I would still read them. I think I read at night to them until they were much older than they'd like to admit. That was one of the ones we read, and it was a very enjoyable book, if I recall correctly. It's about a dragon, correct?
Yep. It's about basically the last dragon left. And it's a lot like Lord of the Rings, but kind of, I think, more fantastical, whereas Lord of the Rings takes a fantasy setting and it's more like realistic.
Do you have a favorite character that you like to write?
Like a specific character or just like a character type?
Well, how about both? What types do you like to write, and then do you have a specific one?
So in general, I like to write, like the main character from my novel was who I wanted to write, which is more introverty and morose, kind of a more moody, angsty character, just because I think it's easier to make them, to create them, because that's more or less what I was used to when I was growing up. But I found that as I was creating more characters, I actually liked to create, like, it was more fun to have one who wasn't so like depressed, essentially, I guess, because they're willing to do more. They're more active. For example, like in my book, Alicia is probably my favorite character, and I didn't necessarily even intend to create her, but she just kind of was birthed from the writing process, and she was based around a lot more positive emotions, which allowed her to like kind of just be more involved than I was expecting.
I love it when characters take over the novels.
Yeah, that happened like a little more than I was expecting, I think, because it was just kind of like, writing, what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden there just comes this really, really strong character. And you're just like, wow, I didn't really necessarily intend for you to like take over everything, but I guess that's what happened.
So were you plotting along and she just jumped in as a pantser?
Yeah, for the most part, like when I'm plotting, I kind of plot major events and then I write in between them to get to those events. So I would just kind of like, I'm trying to get to the next thing, and then she just kind of popped up, and she became such a heavy role with the main character. So she ended up having to be in it for the rest of it.
So do you have more than one novel that you're working on?
I have one that's published, and now I'm working on the sequel.
Do you find it challenging to write a sequel?
Well, initially I didn't think I was even going to write a sequel. And then by the time I finished the first one, I was like, I think I am going to write a sequel. But since they're connected, I don't find it as difficult because it's almost like you're just continuing what you were writing in the first place. And it's not like I have to come up with a whole brand new idea.
Are you able to create this as a standalone book, or will they need to be read in sequence?
Well, like I said, I didn't intend to create a sequel. So I think if you look at the first one, it'll definitely could be standalone. And I haven't quite got far enough into the second one, but I think I would like to write it in a way that it could almost be standalone itself, but it would help to have like read the first one.
That's one of the challenges that people have with writing a sequel versus a trilogy. I think trilogies are expected to be read in sequence. But I don't know. I'm not really a publisher, so I don't have that skill set of knowing what they would do. When did you first realize that you wanted to become a writer?
From a pretty young age, I was introduced to fantasy probably when I was like 5 or 6. So just kind of growing up with that and seeing new stories, seeing new shows, seeing new books. I basically feel like I was raised off stuff like that. And that's kind of like what I wanted to end up doing myself. Like I wanted to be able to create something that someone could take something away from and kind of feel like it's, it's part of them. It's not just, here's this guy who made this thing and I guess it was good or whatever, but I want them to be invested in what I say so that maybe I can help them with something that's going on in their life.
Have you been able to have any book signings or meet anybody who's read your work?
No one outside of family yet. I haven't had any sort of strangers reach out to me and really tell me, oh, hey, this is a great thing. I really enjoyed it. Just my family.
Did you self-publish?
I did self-publish, yes.
What was that experience like?
Well, at the end of the day, I decided to self-publish because I just really wanted to have full control over what I wanted to say. I didn't want someone to be like, well, we're not going to publish it because of this or this. So I was like, okay, I'll just self-publish it. And in terms of like actual experience, I mean, it really wasn't confusing, or it was, it was an okay experience. I used Kindle Direct Publishing, so it was kind of like step by step, make sure it was formatted, upload it, and publish it. It was much more smooth than I actually expected it to go.
Well, that's good to know. Did you have someone create your artwork for your cover?
I did that. Kindle Direct Publishing allows you to do it yourself. They have their own image editing program, and I was able to pick an image, and then I kind of just like inversed the colors and played with it a little bit until I saw something I liked.
Well, congratulations on publishing it yourself. That's a big feat. Many people have to hire someone to do all that.
Well, I had my editor is also my fiancée, so I had some help. She has a degree in English, so she was able to do a lot of the formatting and editing with me. So it made it a little easier than just completely diving into it alone.
Very convenient to have a fiancé who's also an editor.
Yep.
All right. Jeremy, how could people get in touch with you?
Well, I have a Twitter, a Facebook, and a website, and they're all linked. They could also reach me through my email, jharper3088@gmail.com. So yeah, I didn't have anything else.
And what is the name of your book?
Mourning Sky, Evan's Story.
Mourning Sky, Evan's Story. All right, Jeremy, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
I think ready or not, it's going to come.
What's your philosophy on junk mail? And I'm just asking for a friend.
For the most part, I just let it pool up and then I just mass delete them.
Do you keep your old driver's license when you get a new one?
Do they let you? Don't they confiscate it?
Oh, I don't know. I have one. They cut the corner off of it. So
well, yeah, they didn't. I don't have any old ones. So.
All right. And if you have a spirit animal, what would it be?
Oh, man. It's a harder one. I guess it would be like a cat.
A cat, like a lion? Rawr.
No, like a house cat.
Like a house cat. You could bug all the people, knock things off the counter.
Yep.
Sounds like a fun plan. Jeremy Harper, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to have this podcast. I really was looking forward to it all week, so I just really appreciate it.
Again, thank you, Jeremy, for stopping by. This has been another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. Allison out.
Jeremy Harper spent much of his youth traveling up and down the east coast of the United States with his family before settling in Delaware. There he served in the Delaware Army National Guard and attended Wesley College, where he met his fiancée, Sky West, and graduated with a BA in Media Arts. His debut novel, Mourning Sky, Evan's Story, was self-published in the summer of 2019 and pulls from various experiences with love and loss. He currently resides in Florida with his fiancée and Trixie the cat. For more information about Jeremy, follow him on Twitter @JeremyA.Harper. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web at floridawriters.net.